Live from the Venetian Gardens Southport, it's the Jeff the Talking Mongoose Holiday Special 1976, featuring the Dooleys, David Essex and Basil Brush. Come back with us to 1976. Ladybird Plagues, Heat Waves, it's great! I've just come back from the Isle of Man with my friends from Lapis. Whilst we were there, we visited a haunted theatre, we searched for feral wallabies, and we held a seance to try and contact Jeff the Talking Mongoose. But the whole story starts here at Cashen's Gap.
That there is partly the wall of the house.
Right, this is me, Jeff the Talking Mongoose, back at Cashen's Gap, and look at that, that's all that's left of my old gaff. You see why I don't come back here very often? It's nowt, it's just a pile of blinking rubble. You know, I'm glad I'm left, I really am. Not much to say, it's a bit of a disappointment, but there you go. This is all that's left of where Jim, Mum, Vorry and dear old Mona the dog and yours truly used to live. Hey, I wish I hadn't pulled it down. I could have made it into a sort of monument and they could have had one of them blue plaques there saying Jeff the Talking Mongoose lived here, 8th wonder of the world. Oh well, never mind. At last we've reached the star of our show. If there ever was a poster boy for Fortiana, a paranormal superstar, then it's the one and only Jeff the Talking Mongoose. Jim Irving, a former furniture salesman from Liverpool, had moved his family to the Isle of Man, a beautiful wild location that lies between England and Ireland. He bought a house called Cashen's Gap in a remote area of the island. The house had no electricity, no running water, and it must have been quite a culture shock for the family. He brought with him his wife Margaret, his teenage daughter Vorry, and Mona the border collie. The strangeness began on Monday the 14th of September 1931. The family began to hear noises coming from the attic. The sounds were animal-like growling and scratching. Soon these moved to wall cavities, and they thought it may have been rats. Yet as the days went by, the Irvings began to think the noises sounded like a voice. Wrapped up in the texture of the noises were words. The voice seemed to be imitating the words that they use in a way that an infant mimics an adult when it learns to talk. Whatever it was, it learnt fast and began to form whole sentences. The entity began to tell the Irvings what it was. It called itself Jeff and claimed to be a mongoose that was born in India on June the 7th, 1852. At first Jeff was shy and the family only got the briefest glimpses of him. But as time went on, they all saw him clearly. Margaret even stroked him. He was described as being a foot or more long, with yellow fur and a bushy tail. His paws looked almost like tiny human hands. As well as the Irvings, a local boy saw Jeff as he bounded through a field near Cashen's Gap. Description matched that of the families. Jeff would tell jokes and sing. He was fond of the Isle of Capri and Home Sweet Home, and proclaimed to be the 8th wonder of the world. He also made mystic proclamations saying that no one would ever know what he was, and if they were to see him, they would become mummified, petrified, a pillar of salt. Despite this, he was generally friendly and even killed rabbits for the family to cook and eat, leaving them by the door. He seemed to eat food left out for him like a mortal creature, being very fond of chocolate and biscuits. When hungry he would say, "How about some grub, Jim?" Apparently he could travel long distances, invisibly hitching rides on buses to Douglas, the capital of the Isle of Man, bringing back gossip that invariably turned out to be true. He also sneaked into the flats owned by bus drivers and described them in detail to the family. He also went on trips to the north of the island, visiting Ramsey Market. Soon the fame of Jess spread beyond the island and found its way to newspapers around the world. A reporter from the Manchester Daily Dispatch who heard Jeff speak, wrote of the experience that left him in a state of considerable perplexity. Had I heard a weasel speak? In the early days, Jeff said he was a weasel, and then settled down to saying he was a mongoose. Had I heard a weasel speak? I do not know, but I know that I have heard today a voice that I should never have imagined issue from a human throat. The people here at the farm claim to hear the voice of a strange animal, and they seem sane and responsible folk, not likely to indulge in long drawn out practical jokes. The weasel even gave me a tip for the winner of the Grand National Horse Race. Jeff was thought to be a weasel before he told people he was a mongoose. The two types of animal are not closely related despite superficial resemblances. Several investigations into Jeff were carried out. Harry Price, the famous ghost hunter, sent H.E. Dennis, a member of the Royal Zoological Society, to London to investigate. He heard Jeff's high squeaky voice and saw objects thrown seemingly from gaps in the walls. He heard Jeff moving objects such as a ball and a chair around his sanctum. On one occasion, Jeff told Margaret all the details of a conversation that Jim and Dennis had whilst at a pub lunch when only they were there. Margaret relayed details accurately to Dennis afterwards. Dennis made 3 trips to Cashen's Gap in all. Harry Price himself visited Cashen's Gap. Jim told him that Jeff knew he was coming and had taken his leave, saying that Price would put the kibosh on the spirits and had his doubting cap on. Price came away thinking that Jeff was created by the Irvings for their own entertainment. There were several alleged photographs of Jeff taken around the time. The pictures are far from clear, and in my opinion some of them look like mink stoles. Hair that Jeff told the family he had plucked from himself was analysed at the Natural History Museum and found out to come from a collie dog, possibly dear old Mona. Imprints of footprints were shown to be from 3 sources. One was said to be from a dog, one from a raccoon, and one from an animal not native to Europe. Raccoons are not native to Europe. A third set were never identified. None of them were from a mongoose. Other investigators came to different conclusions. Nandor Fodor, 1895 to 1964, was a Hungarian psychoanalyst who visited the Irvings. He didn't see Jeff, but he interviewed all of the family and was convinced that Jeff existed. He wrote that the something which calls itself Jeff exists and talks. I have proved. But as to what it is, opinions may differ. Once we step into the marvellous, reason and logic give us no bearings. Fodor stated that he found the Irvings to be sincere, frank, simple, and that deliberate deception on the part of the whole family cannot be entertained as a solution for the mystery. The charge of ventriloquism is best answered by the fact that Jeff has been heard when each member of the family has been alternately eliminated, he wrote. It is sufficient to spend a day at Dawlish Cashen to know that under the conditions of living it would be impossible to carry on a ventriloquial imposition over a period of years. Dawlish Cashen is the name of Cashen's Gap in the native Manx language. Some people accuse Vorry of throwing her voice to trick people, but Jeff was often heard when she was out of the house. Another theory is that Vorry and Margaret had conspired to fake the haunting in order to convince Jim to move back to the mainland. There was zero evidence of this, and even if it was true, the hoax failed miserably. Fodor rejected the idea that Jeff was a poltergeist. Poltergeists are always invisible, Fodor explained. Jeff never claims to be without an animal form. He eats, drinks and sleeps. He leaves teeth marks in the butter in the larder and the fat of the bacon. He catches rabbits and performs various other services for the family. Poltergeists are an unmitigated affliction. Jeff is an asset. Poltergeist disturbances usually begin just before a young girl or boy in the house reaches the age of puberty. The disturbances die out soon after the critical period. Jeff has not faded out. He grows stronger than ever. He is visibly outgrowing the original affection which bound him to Vorry Irving, the young daughter of the house. Fodor thought that Jeff was a real physical mongoose who had become psychically possessed by a split-off part of Jim Irving's personality. In fact, he may have been on the right track. Probably the best explanation for Jeff is that he was a tulpa or thought form. Suffice to say, for now, that they are thought to be semi-physical creatures created by the power of the mind. Jeff seemed like a gestalt of the minds of the family. He seemed to like things that Vori liked and dislike things that she disliked. He would speak in Hindi, but not very well, much like Jim, who had served in India. He could speak Yiddish, but again, not very well, much like Jim, who sold furniture to the Jewish community in Liverpool. He was the sum of their parts, with added mischief. When the family moved in 1939, Jeff did not go with them. Cashen's Gap Farm was brought by a Mr. Graham, who in 1947 shot an animal on the grounds that some claim to be Jeff. The picture shows that it was clearly a polecat and not a mongoose. The house lay empty for many years and still had a reputation of being haunted right up to its demolition in 1971. If Jeff was a tulpa, it may be possible that he could be revitalised and returned to us, if he ever truly left totally. 14 researcher Jenny Randalls, in her book Supernatural Isle of Man, writes that in October of 2002, whilst driving with her mother on the outskirts of South Barrel, heading to Glen Rushen, she saw a yellowish-brown mongoose bound out into the road in front of her. It stood and looked at the car before bounding off into the undergrowth. Vori ended up living with her elder sister Elsie in Cheltenham, where she worked at an aviation plant. She was very reluctant about talking about Jeff for fear that people would think of her. She only took part in one interview in 1970 with Walter McGraw of Fate magazine. Vori felt that Jeff in many ways had ruined her life. They said I was mental or a ventriloquist. Believe me, if I was that good, I'd be making money out of it now. Jeff was very detrimental to my life. We were snubbed. Other children used to call me the spook. I had to leave the Isle of Man, and I hope that no one where I work ever knows the story. Jeff has even kept me from getting married. How could I ever tell a man's family about what happened? It was not a hoax, and I wish it never happened. If Mother and I had our way, we would have never told anybody about it, but Father was sort of wrapped up in it. It was such a wonderful phenomenon, he just had to tell people about it. Yes, there was a little animal who talked and did all of those things. He was a mongoose, and he said we should call him Jeff, but I do wish he had left us alone. She passed away in 2005. The entirety of Jeff's shenanigans is far too long to relate here, and I would point interested viewers to Christopher Joseph's excellent and comprehensive work, Jeff, The Strange Tale of an Extra Special Talking Mongoose, to get the full story. One of the first things we did when we got to Cashen's Gap was to take a look at Mrs. Irving's gooseberry bushes, practically all that's left of her garden. Can you imagine what it'd be like to have your very own Jeff the Talking Mongoose gooseberries? Here's to Jeff. Behind me, right, are all of Mum's gooseberry bushes. She used to make gooseberry jam and gooseberry fool. It was smashing. But it's just about all that's left of her garden now, these gooseberry bushes. So they're picking a few, see if they can grow them on mainland.
Body to grow some, because all we need to do is...
Janet's picking some of the gooseberries here for the seeds. Dry them out and plant the seeds. This is Janet from Lapis taking some cuttings from Mrs. Irving's gooseberry bushes. We tried to do this last year, but they all died, none of them took. So this year Janet's brought some more equipment with her. She's brought special little pots for cuttings and special compost and the potting powder that helps cuttings take. So she did a whole load of them and put them in these little pots and domes with the powder, and hopefully they'll live and grow into Jeff the Talking Mongoose gooseberry bushes on the mainland.
I don't know about you, but I think the idea of having Jeff the Talking Mongoose gooseberries in one's kitchen garden is a fantastic idea. I'd really like that. And it got me thinking, what other Fortean places are there that one could take cuttings of useful plants from and import them into your garden? I mean, are there sort of crabapple trees from Point Pleasant? Or Owlman of Morn blueberries? The possibilities are endless.
This is the well that was outside our house. Didn't have no running water or lecky or out like that, no mod cons. Bloody hell, when I think back how we used to live, like medieval peasants drawing water from well, candles and bloody lamps. Oh no, give me 21st century please.
I imagine basically that well is full of Dorish Cashen.
I reckon.
The house was demolished in the time.
There we go. Jeff the Talking Mongoose well water. We could start flogging that and make a packet.
It's settled out rather well, it's clear. I'm not going to try drinking it, but it's clear.
We drew some water from the well at Cashen's Gap, but it was a little bit too cloudy to drink. Gail Fiddler went magnet fishing in the well with a magnet on the end of a piece of string. But unfortunately, all she found was a rusty old nail. Where's this nail you found? Oh, that looks like a piece of
nail.
bird shit, to be honest. I've half-inched this brick from the rubble in Cashen's Gap, from the very house that Jeff the Talking Mongoose lived in, and I'm taking it home as a souvenir. The Jeff brick, or Jeff half brick. I'll probably know about this, hoiking it all the way back to the digs, but there you go. Jeff famously loved chocolate, so as an offering Janet left a piece of chocolate in a dry stone wall where Cashen's Gap once stood. There's a small zoo in the Isle of Man called Caracas Wildlife Park, which I've never actually been to. We'll have to get round to going the next time we visit. And it's been there for quite some time. But in the early 1970s, a group of Tasmanian Bennett's wallabies, also known as the redneck wallaby, escaped, and they have thrived on the island. Now Tasmania, which I've visited several times on the trail of the elusive Tasmanian wolf, has a climate very like Britain. In fact, if anything, it's more miserable and rainy. So the wallabies thrive there. You think about wallabies living in sun-baked Australian outback, but the Bennett's wallaby is quite happy in a more temperate, damp climate. Now a fair few of these wallabies must have got out because there's a healthy population, and it's been there for the better part of 50 years, and they're just an accepted part of the fauna. There are no deer on the Isle of Man, so the wallabies don't have any competition, and they fill that ecological niche. And in order to see them, you have to get up fairly early in the morning, because in the afternoon they hide away. So Paul, Janet and I got up at an ungodly hour, something like 5 o'clock in the morning, and drove to some woods that are fairly near to Caracas Wildlife Park, and we saw a number of wallabies. The first one we saw was a big old male standing in a field, and later on we saw a number of them in the woods, but they were fantastic to see. And there are several colonies around Britain of these things. There's a large island on Loch Lomond that has a small colony of Bennett's wallabies on, and there used to be some in the Peak District, but I don't know if they're still there or not. There were some in Devon at one time, but the ones on the Isle of Man seem to be absolutely thriving, and good luck to them, because they're a fantastic addition to the local wildlife. They don't do any damage, they're wonderful things to see, and they're spreading right across the island, and that's great.
And so I'll hold this in the other hand. Ladies and gents, I've got two cameras now. I've got this one, and Richard is going to examine shit. So you may remember this was we found this at Dawlish Cashen. And
Now this looks very fibrous, so it looks like it consists mainly of grass. So if that's the case, it has nothing to do with mongooses, who are strictly carnivorous.
Hmm. Anyone want to watch Richard just dissecting the shit? Richard is dissecting the shit, if anyone wants to watch. This is entertaining, isn't it? So it's mostly grass.
Yes.
We think it's something that eats veg now.
Well, it's got grass
That
in it.
is completely vegetable matter.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's not sheep.
Or dog.
It is not sheep.
I think it's a rat.
It's not rabbit.
I think it's rat.
It doesn't look like rats. I've kept rats.
Yeah, but if the rats are eating different things, you might get different poo, wouldn't you?
And the shape of it.
So.
The shape of it is wrong. It's not rabbit.
Lamb?
I don't think it's a lamb. The only thing I don't think of is a hare.
Oh, it could be, couldn't it? Yeah.
Now the shape was very similar to a carnivore's shape. Carnivores generally have elongated turds.
Be a
Carnivores and omnivores. Whereas herbivores have more rounded. If you think of the droppings of a rhinoceros or an elephant, they're very rounded, like, as are rabbits and sheep. Whereas from something like a tiger or a bear, it's longer and thinner, which was this sort of a shape, but it is entirely vegetable matter in there.
Yeah.
So it's nothing to do with the mongoose, and definitely nothing to do with Jeff.
Right. I don't think Jeff probably does poos. He's probably certainly not in this world. So right, well, that's it. Thank you very much, Richard. Should I cut that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that doesn't make sense because it'd be randomly contracting, wouldn't it?
This is the bed I was sleeping in last night, where strange things happened, unbeknownst to me, but were observed by Jackie, and we're going to be talking about this soon. But this is the bed in the room in Cashen, the house that we've been staying, spitting different distance of where Jeff had his stomping ground, and some strange things happened last night. This house behind me, right? Do you know, Sally? Does thou know, Sally? That's Cashen, where we're staying, like, and way back in 1912 it was owned by this bloke, and his name was Irving, but he weren't no relation to Jim and Margaret and Vorry and all that. It was just a coinkydink. But another coinkydink is that he introduced mongooses, let them go to deal with all the rabbits in the area, but I weren't one of them, because I didn't come over till 1930s, till 1931, and I was born in India. So these other mongooses, they're out to do with me, and as far as I know, they can't speak. This is the Waterfall Inn, where Harry Price stopped when he was investigating Jeff in the 1930s. Unfortunately, it's been empty for some time, and I think it's either going to be ripped down or turned into flats, which is a dreadful shame. It's an awful shame that it can't be kept as a hotel. Maybe even a little Jeff museum.
This is my old friend Jackie Tonks, and at our last night in Cashen, she saw something very bizarre happening to me in bed. No, not that, not what you think. Wish it was, but it wasn't that at all. We were sharing a room. Her bed was about 10 feet or so away from mine, at the opposite end of the room, and she woke up in the night and saw something very, very strange about 4 o'clock in the morning. Okay, Jackie, tell us what you saw.
Oh my god,
Well, I'd just been to the toilet, came back and I was still awake, and I just about to drop to sleep and I heard Richard sort of making quite a lot of noise in his bed, so I thought he was having a nightmare. And I looked over and there was this popping noises coming, working like from the left side of the bed, and then went round by his feet and then to the right and then came back to right, and then it reversed again. So he was definitely reacting to something. It was quite bizarre. And I watched this for about 20 minutes. So yeah, it was quite a long time this was happening for.
I was completely oblivious to this because I was asleep. The only dream I had was a quite pleasant one of meeting up with some old friends and talking about doing a television project, so I didn't have any nightmares. But it's interesting that you say you liken it to a small animal running around the bed. So I'm wondering, was this a visit from Jeff the Talking Mongoose? Because he first manifested as banging and scratching noises. So is he on his way back? That's really interesting.
And it was almost like the way you'd react to an annoying cat in your bed or an annoying little chihuahua dog or something like that. You know, it was the way you'd react to them. You'd be pushing them off you half asleep, and that was what I was seeing.
Well, a little dog will probably be giving it a hug. The cat will probably push off, but the dog will give it a hug.
Yeah.
But it was a very strange thing to think I might have been visited by Jeff the Talking Mongoose. Anyway, well, we're back next year and we'll have to see what happens. The next time something weird happens to me in bed, I hope it's with a couple of gorgeous goth girls.
We were invited to the Centenary Theatre in Peel by a Manx paranormal group. And they allowed us to have a look round inside and talk to them about some of the things they'd seen and experienced in their investigations in the theatre. These included a very tall, dark figure, well over 6 feet tall, who had been seen walking around where there were no human beings, no investigators, and no way in or out, who appeared to vanish into thin air. And also EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, and strange lights, and we saw a sequence of film of one of these strange lights that seemed like a little greeny white comet with a tail attached to it, moving around between the seats in the theatre, and people nearby seemed oblivious. Paul, however, thought this could have been the reflected light from one of the cameras.
And when we three of us just sat in here and we got some really good EVPs, and I haven't got them with me, so take my word on that. But yeah, and they were answering on the spirit box and I was sat on the other side. But we found it quite active in here just for such a small little room. It's quite active. It feels nice tonight. It does feels quite nice.
This is this
But it's interesting looking around
backstage
there.
room here. Do you mind just being in here?
It is, so all of these people are walls of all the people
Missing a
that
fiddler again.
Oh God, where's he gone?
He's always missing a fiddler.
Has he?
No, he's a secret.
Yeah, it's fine.
I'm one of those, I wander off.
Whilst we were there, I experienced nothing unusual or strange, other than seeing a poster for a production called Hitler Ate My Canary.
Sense it straight away. Passed down through the families and stuff. My granddad used to do a spiritualist church in Manchester. My granddad used to do the card reading for people. My mum did. And obviously, I can sense things and see things. And
At Erie Cushlin, the house in which we were staying, we decided one night to hold a séance to try and contact Jeff the Talking Mongoose. Because if he is a tulpa, then he should be able to be reactivated. Right then, if we all put our fingers on the planchette. Just lightly. Just lightly, because there's 6 of us. All of us, except for Paul, who was filming it, engaged in the séance. We found that the planchette would not move when we were trying to contact Jeff. So later on, we changed the planchette for a shot glass. Again, the shot glass wouldn't move, and we thought that perhaps too many people were putting their fingers on the shot glass, making it too heavy, pressing down as it were. And so, most people, except for myself, Jackie and then Emily Jones, took their fingers away. When there were only two people, and then when it was only myself and Ben, the shot glass began to move. We asked if it was Jeff the Talking Mongoose, and it said yes. But then, the letters that it gave us made no sense in any language. It was almost as if it was the sort of white noise you get on a wireless. It seemed to be just nonsense coming in. And after a while, we gave up because we were getting nothing except this gibberish. And even in anagram, it didn't seem to make any sense, or indeed any language we could think of. At one point, Jackie Tonks said that she had an overwhelming urge to start spitting at people and screaming the word nincompoop. But other than that, nothing of note really happened during the séance. The Manx Tourist Board are really missing a trick with Jeff the Talking Mongoose. Nobody owns the copyright to him because he's not a made-up fictional character. He is the ideal poster boy, he's the ideal mascot for tourism in the Isle of Man. Think about it. You could have cuddly Jeffs, you could have Jeff colouring books, you could have the Jeff Trail that takes you around all the sites on the Isle of Man. You could have an animated Jeff on DVDs about the island. All the museums in Peel and Douglas and stuff, some of them cover the folklore of the Isle of Man, but there's not a word about Jeff. If any other place had such an amazing character associated with it, they'd be all over it. But there's nothing on the Isle of Man. So hopefully this will change when the film Nandor, Fodor and the Talking Mongoose comes out, which is next Friday from when this is being transmitted. Maybe that'll kickstart something. But come on, Manx Tourist Board, this is an open goal. Jeff is a great, amazing character, and it could bring the crowds flocking in. Paul from Lapis has had this model of me made. Honestly, what are you thinking? It looks more like bloody Roy Castle than me. You call that Jeff the Talking Mongoose? I'm Jeff the Talking Mongoose, you daft airpuss.
And so, finally, ladies and gentlemen, as part of CFZ TV's dedication to the arts, especially the performing arts, we have the one and only Jeff the Talking Mongoose with his ode to bromidrophilia, and set to a variation of his favourite song, The Isle of Capri. 'Twas in the Isle of Capri that I sniffed pants. Oh, I sniffed pants on the Isle of Capri. 'Twas on the Isle of Capri that I sniffed pants, and I sniffed them so free and easy. I found them in a laundry basket, a lady's panties all covered with weed. Yes, I found them in a laundry basket. I thought these panties are coming with me. They made me go all over tingle, and they sent lovely shudders through me. These yellow stained ladies' panties, when I sniffed them so ardently. For it was in the Isle of Capri that I sniffed pants. Oh, I sniffed pants on the Isle of Capri.